Hello, I'm Sifu Kuttel, and in this video we're going to be working with the Taiji Saber, or the Dao. Now this is really important. This is a very exclusive technique for the Saber. Some of the other videos that we've worked on Taiji Saber, those are techniques that you could use universally with any kind of sword or even a short stick. But this is going to be very specific to the saber itself because it is a single-edged sword, and we are going to be placing our hand, making contact with the spine of the sword. Now, if you have a live blade, meaning that it's a sharp blade, I suggest you do not practice this technique or work on learning it with that live blade. Don't practice this until much later, until you have a better grasp of the technique to avoid any injury. Anytime we place our hand close to the blade, we do have a chance of self-injury. And that's one of the things that when we're learning weapons, we need to learn how to protect ourselves from our own weapon, as well as use it to defend ourselves from an oncoming attack from an opponent and inflict our own counterattacks and do what the weapon is made to do. So as you're practicing, keep safety in mind first, and make sure you're using a double-edged sword or a single-edged sword, because if you use a double-edged sword, you're going to be placing your hand in contact with the blade edge, which is just going to end up in cutting your hand. With that said, have fun. Let's go get to work. This technique is actually going to mirror our rollback from our empty hand position. So just like when we're doing our open hand forms, when we roll back, we're shifting back and then pressing downward. There's a push and pull going on here, which is very important for any saber practice as far as a principle or a concept. So my hand would be grabbing my opponent's hand, pulling, and then I'm pushing with my lead hand here. Now, when we have a sword in our hand, we're not going to be manipulating the opponent like that, but we are adding leverage to the sword. And this is a very specific context. This is going to be something where my opponent is really close, and I don't really have the room or the time to wind up for a big cutting or slicing technique. Here, I find myself with my blade in close towards me, my opponent in close towards me, and I'm going to rely on pressure and draw to cut my opponent. And what I'm going to do is, instead of chopping and swinging to get that momentum here, I'm going to assist by pushing with my other hand. And then with that push, there's also pull. So we have pressure and draw of the blade to make a good cut. So when we do this technique, we can start actually by feet together, and then I'm going to have my fingertips point towards the tip of the sword, and I need to make sure that they stay in contact with the spine. If I'm loose with my grip here, this can be quite dangerous, especially if I'm practicing with a live blade. So I need to make sure there's still a little bit of pressure back, or some counter pressure to that hand. Now I'm going to step back and I'm going to shift, press forward with this palm, which may seem counterintuitive, and then pull with my back hand to actually get a cut here. Now in forms, it's going to roll back just like we would if we were doing the empty hand form. And then we can go into our next technique. In application, the shift is important because now it allows us some waist rotation to further assist in the pressure and draw. But I may find myself just connecting to the opponent and then just having to try to do it from here, and then sink to put my body into it to press and draw. And this would be something where I have to keep the blade against them. Now, if that's all I'm going to do, the hand can change position. This is not a fast cutting technique. This is not something you're going to see or practice with a water bottle on a stand and then try to cut it like this. This is purely to dig in and to slice with the blade edge of the sword. So we're going to be using a lot of the same mechanics, again, that we would with the empty hand form. Now we're going to follow up from here. So we'll start again, feet together. We take that step back, roll back, but now we're going to shift forward and turn the blade so that we can finish up with an assisted thrust. Now again, Form-wise, we can come up and we can poke right here, sliding along that hand. But I prefer in this, if we're going to separate it to more of the martial side of the technique, lock this hand in, pull this in next to your arm and really try to get pressure against your palm. This is going to help you in the long run, because at this range, if we're just using our body to try to poke, or we're just trying to connect to an opponent this close or a target this close, we have a chance of forcing upward or forcing downward or at different angles, and we're not going to have that straight force, that thrusting force that's going to really puncture our target. So we want to keep connection here, closer to the body, and then pressure against our hand, because this will also keep it from going astray. So we have that pressure, we're going to shift forward, and we can think of just like if you're playing pool, you're going to hit that cue ball. We're going to shift forward and then continue the thrust. Again, I like to have a little bit of an angle of the blade edge. It's a little bit upward diagonal here instead of being in that perfect downward diagonal, because I don't have as much pressure and counter pressure on my arm. So I shift back, turn, and then extend forward, okay? Again, remember, this is close range. My opponent has to be right here for me to actually apply this. So I don't need to be very far to connect to them, but to be able to pierce and puncture my target, I have to have a little bit extra pressure this way, and then I want to have my body follow up behind it, okay? And again, there's going to be a little bit of sliding on the hand, but we have to keep pressure on the two. You should really feel this against the palm of your hand. Again, stepping back, roll back, turn, shift forward, and finish the thrust with the body connecting, just like our Tai Chi principles, just as if we're doing an apparent close-up push. Facing this way, I start, shifting back, roll back, shift forward, press. Again, shifting back, roll back, shifting forward, press. So there you have it. Now, when it comes to this technique, I actually really like this as an exploration of our rollback technique, because oftentimes when we're doing just our regular forms practice, we don't have a chance to feel our pressure and counter pressure that's necessary for locking out an opponent's arm when we're doing rollback in the empty-handed form. And now when you have a blade in your hand, you actually do get a sense of having your pressure and your counter pressure when you're shifting back in the technique. So even if your goal is not to use this in a practical sense of sword fighting, it does help your Tai Chi altogether, because you get a better feel for how it should go when you have an opponent's hand in your hands and not a sword. Well, that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll see you in the next one.